Okay. I heard you. Yes, I heard the people asking in the Longlegs review to explain what I meant by this part. There is, of course, an additional twist to things, not revealed until Act 3, which is less of a mystery and more of an impossible to figure out, oh, hey, this is what's really going on thing, in which point we rewind through the movie and tell you what the actual plot is. You know, unless, of course, you're someone who's, like, heard of media from before you were born, in which case you might know what book or movie from the 1940s or early 20th century that the title Longlegs might be a reference to, in which case you might, like, figure out what the twist is right away and then spoil it for yourself, which unfortunately I did, and then kind of got to, like, the twist and said, wait, I wasn't supposed to just, like, know that right away? Oh, well, Jesus, I guess everyone else in the audience is really fucking shocked right now. Why didn't I explain it or try to answer you sooner? Once again, as I keep kind of explaining, and I try my best not to sound like an ungrateful jerk about it, because I genuinely do appreciate every single person who clicks on these, even if you're only clicking to call me an asshole, since, you know, still technically got your money. Eventually, 80 to 90% of the time, this is a one-man operation, and it is not my only operation, one man or otherwise. Also, as I said, it requires me to spoil the entire plot of the movie Longlegs, and I didn't want to do that to the first week that it was out, because sometimes people click on these or see comments without meaning to, and I do try to be considerate about that. I only even brought it up in the first place because honestly, when I was growing up and like right up through college, this was a really common literary media criticism, just pop culture reference. And since the trope it described is still pretty commonplace and people are still pretty not fond of it for all the same reasons, probably more so, I wasn't aware that a new shorthand had replaced it. I figured it was still somewhat well known, so sorry, I guess, if I left people confused with a look-it-up joke that was apparently not as easily looked up as I thought. My bad. Mea culpa, maxi mea culpa. But okay, this should be nice and quick. So, spoiler warning for the movie Longlegs, last chance. The premise of the movie Longlegs is that Longlegs is a mysterious serial killer being tracked by an FBI profiler in the 1990s played by Maika Monroe. She's young and not super experienced because that was the plot of Silence of the Lambs, so it'll work here too. And also she's either literally psychic or just so super duper crazy go nuts good at finding serial killers she might as well be literally psychic. And also the thing with Longlegs is he doesn't technically kill people himself. Apparently he's able to cause otherwise happy families to break down into dysfunction to the point where one or more members murder the rest by way of remotely transmitted psychic inducement of satanic influence from Longlegs by means of an elaborate black magic system that's way too complicated and irrelevant to explain here. So basically, Longlegs has actual psychic powers, so she probably does too, since the FBI only figured this extra bit of info out because she was able to break the Zodiac cipher in Longlegs' letters, taunting them because, unbeknownst to the rest of the feds, he's been sending her personal taunting letters with even more specific cryptic messages. Anyway, it turns out the reason she has actual magic serial killer radar powers is that she and her mother were almost victims of Longlegs back when she was a kid, but Mom made a deal with Longlegs to spare them, where in exchange, Mom became Longlegs' accomplice to help get the evil satanic transmission MacGuffins into people's houses, and the heroine got memory wiped, so she only has vague memories of ever seeing or meeting the guy who actually was Longlegs, but is still being influenced and powered up to be drawn toward evil by Longlegs because he's essentially grooming her to take over and be the new Longlegs, I think, and continue working with her mom to do Satan's bidding. And yeah, it's a better movie than I'm making it sound, honestly.
I don't believe you.
In any case, the long and short of it is that what she thought were her gifts for catching serial killers, and Longlegs specifically, have actually just been Longlegs manipulating her fate from the shadows practically her whole life, up to and including catching him. And that, in the broad strokes, apart from the specifics of how Longlegs' cipher works and the mechanics of how his black magic system does or doesn't actually work, is pretty much exactly what I assumed either the right up front, just plain plot of the movie, or the twist of the movie was just gonna be before I even saw it, just based on the fact that it was called Longlegs. And the reason for that is an epistolary novel by Gene Webster from 1912 and a movie musical from 1955 starring Fred Astaire and Leslie Caron, very, very loosely based on that novel. Both of them called Daddy Longlegs. I will explain.
Do you know how old she is?
Yes, 18.
Yes, a simple little thing like adopting an 18-year-old orphan leads to a mountain of complications as a young girl suddenly finds herself in the middle of a gay, new, and exciting life. When a mysterious benefactor showers her with all the pleasures and gifts dear to her heart. When a sophisticated man about town stirs within her the first gentle pangs of romance. Or does he?
So the characters' general outline, story beat, story arc, narrative point of view, and especially the tone differ wildly between the two versions. And at this point, the movie is probably better well known than the book is the bottom line, to the degree that people remember either of. But the basic premise of Daddy Longlegs works like this. A refined older gentleman of enormous wealth and high social standing notices a teenage girl at an orphanage while traveling abroad and says, "Well, damn, she's fine as hell. But she's a little young even for back now, probably, and also poor and uneducated, so maybe not like ideal wife material. But on the other hand, I really wanna, and I'm rich enough to do pretty much whatever I want with whoever I want, so..."
See, for a brief fleeting moment, I'd forgotten I was rich.
Yeah, so he basically does a full Eliza Doolittle, but on the down low. He adopts the girl, pays for her to go to better schools, travel, basically help her become the kind of woman she deserves to be, but implicitly also it's acceptable for him to marry or at least hook up with when she's slightly more of age, but he does it all anonymously as a silent benefactor who communicates with her only by letter writing. She has no idea who's been giving her all this life coaching and glow-up help, and nobody who does know is allowed to tell her. She only knows that he's apparently a guy who's really tall from people who've seen his shadow, so her nickname for him is Daddy Longlegs. So I should probably stress, while this was considered an acceptable premise for a lighthearted musical romantic comedy way more recently and for way longer than it probably ever should have been. In fairness, it also wasn't considered like one of the good Fred Astaire movies. Like, even in its day, the critical response was mostly, yeah, good dancing, looks nice, but it was generally thought of as a dumb version of the book, which is mainly told from the young woman's point of view and is more about going to school, picking what classes she's going to take, dealing with her schoolmates, wondering who the hell this dude is, ruminating on education and travel and the subject she's learning, what she thinks about things. It's still a weird premise, given that it still ends up as a positive romantic thing viewed through a lens 112 years later, but you can understand why it was popular then and why someone thought they could make it into a movie. That movie is mainly from the Astaire character's perspective, and it's just about how he's a cool but kind of shy guy, and that plus the innate artifice of the dance musical elements is supposed to sand the edges off the premise, but there's also just not a ton of real narrative movement or conflict since we know what's going on the whole time. Like, it isn't a surprise for anyone but her, and even if it weren't creepy, it'd be kind of dull, and it is pretty creepy. I mean, sorry Fred, they can't all be enduring classics, and this one wasn't a huge hit on initial release. But the above average for the mid-50s dance sequences, which are the unquestioned high point, in particular the Nightmare Ballet designed by French specialist Roland Petit, who was brought to the US specifically to create this, got the movie into the general heavy replay and repertory and film school rotation shortly thereafter, so it ended up being pretty well known and long-lived among mid-tier Fred Astaire works. And that meant when the mid to late 60s and early 70s rolled around and the reappraisal of canon classic media by people other than old white guy establishment became academically en vogue, well, you can imagine what feminist film and pop culture scholarship had to say about the premise of rich guy purchases a teenager, pays for her to be schooled into an acceptable wife, and this all works out for romantic positivity premise of Daddy Longlegs.
Just like never-ending, constant chaos. No, it never lets up. I hate it. It's not good.
Okay. I mean, you didn't like that?
No, that's what I'm talking about. It's exactly what I
you
mean.
didn't like that? I'm sorry.
Well, it's not. You didn't do it. It's not your fault.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much to the point where the entire time I was growing up, from the early 80s till yesterday basically, the only context for this movie book ever extensively being spoken of was to explain why calling a character in fiction or reality who does seemingly generous things for younger women because he's hoping to build up credit towards sexual favor, a Daddy Longlegs. Seriously, this was a thing people, mostly women, would say to describe basically the sneaky evil version of a sugar daddy. Like, that character's acting possessive of her. I think this is a Daddy Longlegs situation. Or, Susie, that guy is pulling a Daddy Longlegs on you. You gotta cut him off and, like, talk to somebody. I guess this movie fell out of usage because that was so prevalent, so nobody really watched just the movie anymore. And we don't really use euphemisms like that. We just say straight up grooming or predatory. It's like how when that whole Dr. Luke thing was happening with Kesha, I never heard that many people use Svengali as a reference, even though that used to be the go-to nickname for evil guys manipulating women with dreams of stardom, and the original book was even about a singer. But, like, why say Svengali when everyone just knows Dr. Luke as the reference point for that kind of guy now because internet? And also, you know, that book is wildly anti-Semitic as well. Anyway, you asked, so that's the answer. That's why I knew, or at least very accurately guessed, most of what was going to happen with the big Longlegs has been manipulating her with letter writing from behind the scenes all the time, twist in Longlegs, because of the title. Which didn't make me like the movie any less. So, yeah. Okay, yeah. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.